I'm ready to go. Hello, magical humans. This is the TransAtlantic Transmask podcast, accompanying you on your own trans journey or giving you an insight into ours.
We hope you'll come along for all the stories, shares, challenges, changes, questions, affirmations, and euphoria as it relates to each of our transitions happening in real time from across both sides of the pond.
I'm your host, Frit.
And I'm your other host, Ryan Reese.
In today's episode, we'll be discussing our origin story. So essentially, when we first started to develop consciousness around gender. But before we begin, I want to welcome and say thanks to all of you out there listening and tuning in from all around the world. We really hope that this podcast can help and support you in some way.
Also, we would love it for you to interact with us in the comments if you're on YouTube or on Twitter at TransAtmask. We're taking future episode ideas and we'll also be conducting polls to better include the community in our discussions. So definitely reach out and connect. Wait, who's going first?
You take it away.
Me? Oh God, okay. All right. Woo! Okay, hold on, actually. Hold on, I'll be right back.
Where are you going? It's like some weird surprise. At least I hope it's a surprise. I hear unzipping.
Oh God.
And you've just hit your knee on something? I don't know. I literally don't know what's happening.
I thought this would be kind of funny. I forgot I was going to have a guitar.
Oh my days, I have no idea what's happening right now and I'm so excited. Okay.
This out of tune guitar. Oh Jesus, I have so much equipment I can't even hold the guitar. Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start.
Wow.
Okay, so let's begin.
That's all? Oh,
That was it. That's all you got.
I'm like so gutted that we didn't hear more of that. I thought just I thought your whole section was suddenly going to become a musical.
That would have been awesome. Shoot, maybe I should go back to the drawing board and write that song so it can be my origin story. Stay tuned for future episode where I recreate my origin story in musical format. Okay, no. So begin at the beginning, which actually begins before I began. What do I mean by that? So it's kind of interesting how parents will say things like, oh, I have 3 boys, I want to have a girl, or like, I have 2 girls and I really want a boy, desiring a certain gender of their child. Like they want this, either a boy or a girl. And for me, my mom had my 2 brothers who are much older than me. So she had them and always wanted a girl. Like this was her whole thing. Like she grew up with 3 brothers. And so this is why I'm kind of starting here, because you'll see it kind of pertains to my story and how I was brought up, or like how I kind of suppressed my identity. Because my mom always wanted a girl and she couldn't have the girl. And she was told by multiple doctors that she would never have kids again. And it was kind of like her dream shattered, right? Like this like dream that she had always had of having this relationship with a daughter. And so then, so like I said, went to multiple doctors. They're all like, you're not going to get pregnant again. And she was just like totally gutted. She was really shattered by this. And 15 years later, she figured, she told me later that she felt kind of weird. And she didn't quite know what was going on. She thought like, oh, am I going through menopause earlier? Like, clearly I cannot be pregnant. So she just didn't really think anything of it. And then the story that I always told, which I think it may have been a little bit altered somewhere along the lines, but that she got really into cycling. Like her friends were like, let's get healthy. She was almost 40 at this point. And she was out for a bike ride on her own. And she took a corner too tight and got into like an accident. And she was like, okay, but they had to take her, to the hospital, just make sure everything was okay, like get checked out. And they're like, oh yeah, you're fine. But did you know that you're 4 months pregnant? And she was like, what?
4 months?
Yeah. Yeah, she was 4 months pregnant. She's like, what? Like, that's impossible? And so then, of course, inevitably, it's been 15 years after she told me she would like dream of having a little girl. She would like wake up in the middle of the night like crying because she knew it couldn't come true. And then she was like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. Like maybe this is my girl, but I don't want to know. Like she was like, I don't want to ruin this. And so my dad was like, are you kidding me? Like we got to find out. We got to find out what, what's the sex of the baby. So he found out, and then he would like perpetually like tease her like, oh, don't you want to know? Don't you want to know? And so I used to tell this story so often. And the ending, of course, was a happy ending, right? Because they found out. My mom said, okay, finally tell me, fine, tell me. And I'm like, we're having a girl. And it was like, oh, they're so happy. Like they're crying with, love and excitement. And that was the story that I always told. And everyone's like, it's so great because you're just kind of like this miracle child in essence that you were like dreamed and prayed for and what have you. And so then here I come along. And then the joke always was that it's a great story. And then the joke is like, oh, but I'm such a tomboy because I've always like was very masculine as a kid, and as we know now, clearly, that I am a boy. But at the time, it was just like, oh, I'm a tomboy. Like, how funny that she wanted this girly girl, and I was always refusing to do anything that was remotely feminine. She'd, like, try to dress me up in the ballet clothes, and I would, like, scream and kick and cry, and, wearing a dress was just not going to happen. And, oh, do you want this cute pink sparkly thing? Like, no, get that away from me. Like, that's toxic. So it was kind of like this story in a way that was, cute and great and like happy all around. But whenever I would tell it, I would always kind of have this kind of weird feeling inside of me that I kind of like knew a truth that I was trying to stifle because I didn't want to obviously ruin this like family miracle that had happened and like creating this kind of balance and, dream come true for my parents and especially my mom. And my mom and I were quite close. So, flash forward, I'm starting to become aware of myself and, this story and just like how much I was loved was definitely shown to me from an early age, but it was a lot of times in the context of being a girl, in being this miracle that had come along for my mom, because everyone had waited. My mom had waited, my brothers were excited, my dad had waited, my grandparents, finally the girl is here. Remember, 15 years later. So my brothers are 15 and 17 years older than me. And at around 3 or 4, I would say, is when I realized that this category wasn't, that there was a category, in fact, even, didn't quite fit me. And that kind of, I know people all the time are like, how can children have emotional capacity to understand what their gender is at such a young age? But you do. Like, cis people don't realize that they do too, right? Like, you have like a feeling of like, oh, that's who I am. But when you're trans, you don't have that. And I definitely had those feelings at about 3 or 4 of feeling like my body isn't right. Like, I'm missing things, or you're telling me to go in this category, but like, that's not the category I'm in. I'm a boy, Mm-hmm. And that mm-hmm. coupled with the fact that everyone around me seemed so excited and elated that I was a girl was really confusing. Mm-hmm. So obviously, like, the story continues on, and of course I couldn't have known like the gravitas of the kind of miracle child until a little later, but like I still had like the essence of it, that everyone seemed very pleased that I was a girl. So that's my origin story, I would say. Is it's like a building up an expectation, and then from a young age feeling, once I had an awareness that there was kind of these categories, that I didn't fit in the category that I was put into. Your turn.
How does that, before I do launch into mine, how does that make you feel now reflecting on it?
It's like I'm still processing it. I think it's really a strange thing to realize that like these experiences that were of course presented with such love and adoration, well, not adoration, but just love from my parents was like a weird kind of like trauma. It's like really strange. And trying to like parse through that and separate the two so I don't end up feeling like, oh, they never loved me, which it's easy to slip into that because like, oh, they never saw me, so did they ever love me? They were just loving this like person they thought I was, even when I was a kid. I don't believe that, but it's easy to slip into that. And I would say that that is sometimes where like I can go when I kind of get into these like darker moments. I think that life, there's something with, you know, the comic and the tragic, right? Like there's this often when we tell stories, we match these two together. And for me, definitely my coping mechanism my whole life, and I think just a way that humanity deals with things that are difficult, is to see the humor in it. And I do kind of see this as kind of this like, and as I did before, just being a tomboy, right? My mom always wanted this girl, and here I am, a tomboy, clearly. Like that's kind of ironic. And now it's like, it's pushing it even further. The fact that she got a trans queer son. I don't know, there's something kind of humorous in that to me. That like of all the things, I'm like the whole spectrum. I'm the whole spectrum of things. And so I think that for me, I have to see that there's kind of some humor in this. And I wish that my parents could see that, like, you know, deep down I'm the same person. So it's like, it's not as big of a stretch as they might think. Yeah. I feel like there's lots to say about it.
Yeah. I can see how if you were this miracle child, that before you were even born, you were put up on this pedestal and you're already categorized in a way that was kind of this like magical being. I know we've just talked about the word magic and magical in a different sense before we started recording. But yeah, like, you know, putting you up on a pedestal in this sort of magical container of the being that they wanted you to be. I feel like that's something that we do as human beings for lots of other people too, in terms of putting people up on pedestals, assuming that they're going to be a certain type of person. And then I guess this is why some people say don't meet your heroes, because they're worried that they'll let you down because you've built them up to be this type of person, when really you know nothing about them. You only know, I mean, before you were born, your parents literally knew nothing about you. So how can you...
They would probably argue otherwise. But it's true, right? Like expectations can kill joy. And it is interesting because when I was younger, you know, even though I had suppressed my transness, and there's many reasons for that, but I would always tease my mom and I would say, you willed me to be a girl. It was you. Like, I was supposed to be a boy. I would say that, you know, but we never thought about it in a trans context. And maybe that is denial. Big denial. But I would always kind of make this joke. You willed it. You wanted it so badly that you changed me. I was supposed to be a boy and then you made me a girl.
Wow. That's so telling already that kids know.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the joke that I would say, you know, up through high school, college, and yet still it didn't, like, I couldn't allow it to come in to full consciousness. Like, there was so much fear, and obviously the obligation to be the daughter and everything. Like, there's a lot packed into that. But yeah, that's kind of the beginning. So I think it sets up a lot for how the rest of my life goes.
Yeah, 100%, which we can definitely go into in future episodes if you're happy to do that.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
So my origin story, I think, starts, you know, more when I entered the world as opposed to sort of being in womb. I actually...
Pre-womb.
Pre-womb, what's that? Like, just... Preconception? Like, what's pre-womb?
Yeah, pretty much. I feel like there was stirrings in the universe. Something was happening.
I mean, yes, I truly, fully put all my trust in the universe, so I would completely agree that that's a thing. But yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking maybe I need to sit down with my mum and talk about her expectations of me as she was having me, because I'm an only child, so I kind of had this sort of magical child thing about me too, in the sense that they tried to have other children, but I'm the only child that my parents ended up having. And so all of their time, attention, love, everything went into me. There's lots of pros and cons of that. And for the most part, I think I've really benefited from it. But what's really interesting, and the thoughts I keep coming back to, are all the different signs and indications that were there when I was from a really young age all the way through my childhood that I could possibly be trans. Like, there were so many really strong signs. And when I watch things now, like on TikTok and stuff like that, of parents who are raising trans kids, I'm like, oh, the fact that these parents have the knowledge of what transgender could mean for their kid and raising them in an environment that's nurturing of that. It's not, I don't want to sort of slam my parents for not picking up on what I now think are really obvious signs. I just think they didn't have the knowledge about it. So there's so many things, like, for example, when I first started school, so I was about 4, I remember that, so you know how school years run, do your school years run from like September to July as well? Like, that's our school years, yeah, okay. And so we kind of enter into like an autumn winter season, and then you come out into spring summer. So when I first started school, the kids in my school, during autumn and winter, we'd have a different uniform to spring and summer. And we would, for autumn and winter, we'd all get to wear a tie. I say get to wear a tie like it's some kind of lucky thing, but like
I know, even the way you said it, you're like, I could get to do it. Yeah, that's telling right there.
But that's how I felt. I loved it. Every morning it was this sort of ritual of putting on a shirt and putting on a tie, and there was something about it that I really loved. And I really disliked the summer uniform, which was this kind of like light blue and white plaid dress, and I hated it. But everyone had to wear it, so I mean, what could you do as a kid? Very little.
But just the girls had to wear it. Yeah.
Yes, and then the quote boys had to wear in summer and in spring and summer they wore like a polo shirt and shorts, and I was like, I think I'd rather wear that. But anyway.
Oh man, there's so much with clothes. But that's funny that you said that, because just you talking about the tie, I had an instant remembrance of my childhood when I was in Girl Scouts, brownies, and they had like this little like tie thing that you'd put around your uniform, and you'd kind of like clip it in the front. And I remember loving that part of my uniform, and I never ever thought of it as like, oh my gosh, I'm putting on a tie. Maybe that's why I loved that so much. And I also liked the tassels on the socks.
Where on the, and like
pull your socks up, and there was like little tassels on the, like at the calf length. I was a very queer child from a young age, clearly, that I liked the tasseled socks and the little tie around the neck. But I totally get what you're saying with the parents now, right? Like, it's hard to look back at our own parents and think, well, they just didn't understand or have the knowledge, or, I mean, we barely did too, right?
Yeah, 100%. So from as young as 4, I remember really enjoying particular types of clothing that I suppose we would categorize into sort of more of a stereotypical male-female kind of categories. And I remember, I think I was 6 or 7, and I was walking in town with my mum and my grandma, and the way that the town was at the time, there was this long slope that would take you to this big department store. And I remember going ahead of my mum and my grandma, and when you're 6 or 7, just even being 100 meters away from my mum or grandma was kind of like independence. So I remember sort of
full independence. I'm my own person.
So I remember sort of creating this bigger and bigger gap, and then I just started doing this, like, I guess it was kind of like the swagger. And I feel from my memory I was kind of walking like this, like a tiny version of me, just sort of walking up this slope like this. And I remember my grandma saying to my mum, why is she walking like a boy? And then I stopped and was like, oh, is that a boy walk? I felt really embarrassed about it. Like, oh, I was actually kind of enjoying this like swagger from side to side. Like I was just having a good time. But already there was this kind of gendering of movements. And I think that really stuck with me in terms of even just a walk. And I remember later on in life, people would say I had a lesbian walk. And I'm like, why is everyone labelling my walks? Can people just stop labelling my walk? This is just how I get from A to B.
Yeah. It's just how I walk, people. Although, you know, at times you might be like, oh, I kind of like that I was walking like a boy. Like, did you have like an inkling of that? Of like, you were in, like, did you feel like, oh, I'm like, was that in your consciousness of like, oh, I feel like a boy, and then called out for it? It's like changed your.
I think I didn't even register that the walk had a gender. I just was like, I actually am starting to feel quite confident and empowered, and oh, that's just been slam shut. Like that was kind of it was a really short-lived experience of, I don't know, maybe even under a minute, you know. It didn't last very long. And the fact that I still remember that is really telling, that that's something that has really stuck out in my memory.
And did you immediately feel like it was something wrong?
I did, only in terms of feeling embarrassed about it. Like I felt sort of like, oh, I'm meant to be a girl, so I shouldn't walk like this, was kind of the very quick thought process. So then I just stopped immediately. And I don't remember ever then sort of continuing to walk like that day or any other day.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
So, yeah, get this. So when I was about 10 or 11, I remember that there was a TV show that was called Make Me a Man on TV. I don't know how I found out about it. And it was following 3 trans guys as they were about to get lower surgery. I honestly don't know how I managed to find it.
Whoa.
And I asked my mum if I could watch it, and she said, yes, if I can watch it with you. And we sat and watched it together. She doesn't remember this at all. I brought this up with her recently. She doesn't remember the show.
That's always interesting to me too, like the things you remember. And other people are like, what? Did that even happen? And you're like, it is so seared in my memory. Like the fact that it stayed there.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I just find that so interesting that at that young age, I found a show like that and then was like, I need to watch this. I mean, in and amongst watching Super Mario and Power Rangers, I then wanted to watch a show about trans men. Like, if that doesn't tell you something, like...
Do you want to divulge more into that story, or do you want to save that?
No, I mean, there's not much more to say about it other than just, I remember, like, only tiny bits of the show. I didn't pursue anything after that. My parents didn't ask me any questions about it after that. We just watched the show together, and then that was it.
Did you have any, like, discussion with your mom about it, or was she did she
none.
give any feedback? She didn't give any feedback of like, oh, that's, I mean, I could just imagine from my mom, she would be like, oh, that's awful, or who knows, I don't even want to try to think, but
No, honestly, she was just, I feel like in my memory she was just silent, that she would just I feel like from what I remember, she sat there silent watching it with me. Maybe she was waiting for me to take the lead to sort of say, oh, hey, mum, like, actually, this show is something that I find really interesting, and maybe when I'm older, I might want to pursue something like this. But I didn't say anything because at the time I had no knowledge that, I had no knowledge about transgender people, and I had no knowledge about sort of my wanting to identify in any particular way. All I recognised was that some things made me feel uncomfortable and some things made me feel comfortable. And if you look at them now in terms of where they fit in terms of sort of, you know, binary categories, typically they fall within sort of like a more male characterised category. So that was it. Those were the only sort of thought processes I had around it. But I just find it so interesting that at that young an age, the thing that baffles me is I honestly don't know how I found it. I must have looked through the TV guide and then read all about it and then gone, oh yeah, that's really interesting.
Oh, wow. So it was not just like you turned it on. It was like you found the show listed and was like, I want to watch this. And then went to your mom, Wow. See, I was thinking you were just like flipping through the TV and we're like, oh, Mom, do you mind if I watch this? No, it was like you found this thing.
Yeah,
It was like
genuinely,
an
I
event.
remember it was like I asked her beforehand before it had come on, so I found it somehow. Must have been the TV guide because my parents love a TV guide, so like a printed TV guide.
It's a classic. It was very useful back in the day. Guys, we had paper booklets, okay?
You know what? You say back in the day, my parents still buy a TV guide now for every week. Every week.
Yes. Love it. I love it. Hey, so it's nice to have something tactile. It's got everything in there. It's one little booklet. You don't have to search all over.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that we both have really, really early recognition of gender. I mean, kids have early recognition of gender, but for us, we had the feeling that something was kind of amiss or that we weren't quite being seen or understood as we wanted to be. And it sounds like for both of us, it was around 4 years old. And that's not the case with every trans person, of course. And it's interesting, though, that we have a similar kind of experience there. And I will talk about more on this later, but just you saying about like how you were walking and they're like, oh, why is she walking like a boy? I had a huge, there was a huge deal around my name because my name was Ryan. I'll talk more about this in another episode. There was definitely some harumphing around the fact that they finally got this girl and then named me Ryan.
Oh my God, that's so fascinating.
That is actually my name.
Yeah, so Ryan isn't even like your chosen name.
No.
Like, Ryan is your birth
Yeah.
name. Which is like, could the stars be more aligned?
I know. I know. And my middle name is Lindsay. And I don't know if in the UK that's more of a male name, but I know that in like Australia and New Zealand, like Lindsay can be a man's name. And so like that's kind of interesting too. It's like this.
I think it's still more typically a woman's name.
Is it? Yeah. But it's just kind of interesting. Like, and my partner always teases me. Like, I think you're a Lindsay. I think you're going to become a Lindsay again. I was like, we'll see. We'll see. Kind of queering my name once again. Going through life being the girl Ryan, now I'll be the boy Lindsay.
Sure, why not? I mean, it's your life.
That's right. And yeah, we'll have to see how it pans out.
I mean, you've got sort of this stage now, which seems sort of like you have a sort of idea of how you want this stage of your life to go, and then who knows what happens after that.
I like a sort of idea that pretty much plainly describes most of my life. I've got a sort of idea of what I would like to happen. All right. Well, I think that we've have we told our origins in a fashion that keeps it around 30 minutes? I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Let's sign off and let other people tell us their stories if they want to. So my question for all of you who are listening or watching is, at what point did you become conscious of your gender, whether you identify as trans, gender non-conforming or cis? Just at what point in your life did you really start to register your own gender and how that made you feel, and what roles and expectations that then sort of started to mean for you, and when you started to understand about that too? That's just like, I mean, that's a huge topic, but yeah, it's I'd be really fascinated to hear from other people about when they started to really register their own gender as well.
Totally. No, I'm really curious, because when did you kind of have this like consciousness of like, oh, there's like categories? And I think that for a lot of us it's younger than we realize, and that's why trans kids can know from a young age.
Yeah, totally.
If you're listening on podcasts, obviously there's nowhere to like leave a comment there, but if you're on YouTube, leave it in the comments, or you can head over to our Twitter page and we can ask the question over there on our Twitter page as well, and so you can respond there. We have email set up too. It's the same as our Twitter, transatmask@gmail.com. And I feel like that's kind of it, right? So a big thanks for tuning in today. So definitely follow us on our podcast. Leave us a review. I mean, if you love it already, that would be awesome. It definitely helps spread the word. And give us a thumbs up on YouTube. And we read all of the comments and everything. We're open to new episode ideas. We're just beginning. We want you to join the community. And is that all we have, Frit? Or Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just read what you've written here. Join the community or you're not invited to our birthday parties.
Oh, yeah, I did say that.
Okay, let's do that this one. Join the community or you're not invited to each of our birthday parties. That's at least 2 birthday parties a year that you're not invited to.
So you better join. Hit that subscribe. Follow us. Until next time, stay magical.